Today we are speaking with Matt Peters, CEO and co-founder at Fixify. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
So before we get started, Matt, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am a father of two. That's sort of my proudest achievement. Two lovely young ladies. I live in the Washington D.C. Area. I've been in building teams, products, and companies for over 25 years. Most of my experience has been in cybersecurity, so building things like networking equipment and deep packet inspection, that sort of thing. But then more recently, in the last sort of 15 years or so, switched to what you'd call services as software companies where the product and the offering is a combination of both technology and people. Got my start doing that at a company called Mandiant, where we're doing incident response for sort of nation state actors, that kind of thing. And, ever since then, I got fascinated with that motion of optimizing human computer interaction and like making it so that people could be really, really efficient, which is just a problem I find endlessly fascinating.
If somebody asks you what Fixify is, how would you describe it in a sentence or two? And what problems were you looking to solve for? And who was your target market?
My elevator pitch is effectively we're IT help desk in the sky. So if you're a mid-sized company, you're growing and you're saying to yourself, hey, I want to either continue delivering IT support to my internal users, or I want to improve the way I'm delivering IT support to my end users, and I don't have a boodle of money to spend, then we may be your huckleberry. The problem we were really trying to solve was there was this lacuna in the market. There was like a sort of a blank spot where companies that were sort of smaller than 200 employees or so could go to something like a regional managed service provider or something and do business and get their IT needs met. But once companies scaled beyond that, and they got into like the 300, 400 employee range, we found that like oftentimes MSPs didn't really play well up there, particularly if you weren't geographically centralized. A lot of MSPs are sort of regional. So if you have an office in New York and one office in Chicago and an office in Atlanta, like a regional MSP isn't really going to help you. You're going to need to have three. And at the same time, that's about the time you start having opinions about like, oh, well, my users want to use Asana instead of this, and they want to use, Salesforce instead of this, this kind of thing. And so the sort of more formulaic or more templated delivery that managed service providers tend to do tended to fall down a bit. And at the same time, you're also starting to really end up in a situation where your end users have some real demands on IT. So like at that point, you're like, I don't have any backup, I don't have any help, and I'd really like to continue delivering high-end service to my end users because they can't be debugging their own laptop issues and like, dealing with, their SaaS app problems and stuff like this. And this was just made more complex by this like massive explosion in SaaS apps. It was kind of amusing stat, like the average company has 153 SaaS apps. We actually have customers who have more SaaS apps than they have employees, which is a thing that just blows my mind. And so like, when you look at that, you're like, okay, so now you want to deliver really, really high quality service, but you can't keep increasing the amount you spend on IT every year as you add more employees. So what do you do? So we looked at it and said, could we help those people? Could we jump in and say, hey, for some class of this work, we'll connect up to your existing technologies. We'll end up showing up and being your tier 1, tier 2 help desk so you can focus on the parts of this that really drive your business forward. And so that's kind of what got us interested in that. And that's a motion that we were sort of, familiar with in terms of, it's going to be a combination of tech and people. And so we got started in about 16 months ago.
Okay, so you're relatively young. I have a question for you for my own personal knowledge clarification. So you mentioned something that after 300 people, it's not templated anymore, that people are using multiple applications. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So, and when you're a smaller company, so for instance, if you put yourself in the position of like, I'm a 50-person, animal hospital in Northern Virginia, and I'll just use an example that I'm actually familiar with because my mother-in-law worked for one, right? Your IT needs are, hey, we need a payroll system, we need email, we need a couple of things. And what you don't want is you don't want to make a lot of decisions about that because your business is animal hospitaling, right? So a managed service provider shows up and says, we will sell you all the laptops, we'll sell all the software, we'll do everything. So you just press one button and you have your IT stack. And that's an amazing solution. And like, they'll show up and help you if things break and all this sort of stuff. And these are like, great stuff for that kind of a business. But if you put yourself in the position of I'm a 200-person startup becoming a 300-person startup, and I just started a marketing team, as an example, they're going to show up and have a lot of opinions about a MarTech stack that they want. They're like, oh yeah, well, that thing that you had before for the 100-person company, that's not going to scale. We're moving from, not to throw a rock at anybody, but like we're moving from HubSpot to Salesforce as an example, a canonical thing. Like, well, your standard IT MSP is not going to help you with those sorts of decisions, and they're not going to end up, and that those kinds of decisions multiply like kind of exponentially as your company grows. And so that's one of the things that we've seen people really struggle with is how do we deal with that? And like if you're the IT company or the IT team at this company, like you've just started, you crossed 100 people, now you have like maybe 1, 2 people in your IT team. As you grow, the IT teams tend to grow at about like for every 100, 150 employees, you end up with like one more IT person. So a 300-person company, you'd expect to have sort of 3 IT people, but they have 150 something SaaS applications, right? So like at that point, it's like they're going to be kind of outgunned without some additional help, and that's kind of where that comes in. But you can't show up as a company that's growing at that rate as a 3-person IT team and say, we're going to tell you how you do stuff. Like it doesn't really work that way. And you could ask, IT providers who have really happy user bases try to like figure out what they want as opposed to show up with a bunch of rules. And so that's one of the reasons why the templating, tends to break down a bit.
Got it. And so how does the intersection of like these multiple SaaS apps, why is that an issue, or why does that complicate things?
Well, and so in this case, when you have all these different SaaS applications, a lot of the issues that you're going to run into are things like access provisioning and, hey, I forgot my password, and hey, I don't know how to use this, or this application doesn't seem to be working, that sort of thing, right? So the first thing is you can't be an expert at all of these things. And no matter what you use, like you're going to implement some sort of single sign-on or some sort of MFA thing, it's not actually going to allow you to provision access to all these applications because a lot of them don't respect, they don't do skim, or they don't respect, the stuff. So you'll have like, we're going to put a tile in Okta, but now we have to go over here and provision the user, so on and so forth. All of that work needs to happen, and it needs to be done relatively seamlessly, because when you add people, like you're a growing company, every one of those people shows up and is like, oh, okay, well, I need all the marketing applications and I need access to it. So somebody needs to go do all that. But if you have someone on your own team do that, it's not really tremendous value add. You need it to happen. It's sort of KTLO. It's keeping the lights on. Like you have to have that, and it has to be good. So one of the things though that helps a company like Fixify is that we integrate with all that technology. And so when it comes time for, like, if you say, hey, I want you to take on user provisioning for us, we're integrated with Okta, we're integrated with these SaaS applications. So our analyst gets the request, hey, we have a new user, and we, have a process for onboarding the user. We do all the stuff, and we have a QA process at the end that checks it all. We can guarantee you that, hey, we onboarded your user and we did it effectively. We did it well. They've got all the things that they need. That end user is happy with their first day of work because they're effective. And part of that was our platform together with our person, because again, some of it was done via APIs and some of it you had to just log in and configure things. And so that's where we existed, sort of the nexus of that.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Internal support as well, right? Okay. Was there a particular moment or experience? Because it sounds like you made the jump from security into the combination of customer support and personalization and IT. Like, what was the moment that made you have that epiphany or jump into changing direction?
Sure. So there are two moments career-wise that sort of took us from like, hey, we're cybersecurity folks, and now we're going to go focus on building an IT company. The first one was when we had an aha at the previous company. My co-founders and I all met at our previous company, and we were working on a product that was around security operations. And we had this aha, which effectively was, you can spend a lot of time trying to automate something and like automate the people all the way out of it, right? And that oftentimes takes a hard problem and turns it into a capital H hard problem, right? Or you could just focus on what are the annoying parts of this problem that I should automate? And then like, how do I make the person in the middle of this process the most effective they could possibly be? And it turns out that's both a much easier problem to solve and oftentimes a much better solution, because then it's also more flexible. Humans are great at dealing with corner cases and things like this, right? That turned into sort of a fascination with processes like that, like the processes that actually involve humans and computers together. I always tell the story. I ended up watching a documentary at one point about people and robots, or people and AI working together. And they had this example of an art installation thing that they did in Germany, where they had a whole bunch of people together with an AI build a sculpture. And the thing that was interesting to me was actually that the AI was the one that came up with the sculpture, because it was a 3-dimensional sculpture. You can think about like sort of like a reverse mobile. So it's sort of like supported from the ground. Designing that kind of thing is really easy for a computer, because 3 dimensions don't scare a computer, but it's hard for a human mind to comprehend. But the people put it together because it's really hard it was made of these little sort of sticks. It's really hard for robots to grip weird shaped objects, but humans, we do that all the time. And what that really put me in the mind of is if you can figure out where to put people to make them maximally effective, people can be absolutely superhuman, right? And like it's not a net negative to have people still in your process. So that was the first aha. My co-founders and I are sort of univocal on that. The second thing, though, is the IT piece got really interesting to us as we started realizing that, like, a lot of the stuff that was in there now, a lot of the automation technologies, a lot of the AI technologies and stuff, were focusing very much on efficiency. Like, how fast can we get this work done? How much of it can we end to end automate? And I was talking to a CIO as we were sort of like exploring ideas and stuff like this. And one of the things that I asked the CIO was like, hey, what metrics are important to you that you report out to boards and things like this about sort of IT? And he said, and I apologize because he said it exactly this way. And so, like, he was a colorful gent. He was like, no one gives a shit about my metrics. He said, like, if people are happy, then no one will ever look at the numbers. And if people are unhappy, no numbers will save me. And we started thinking about that. We're like, are we optimizing for the wrong thing? Like in IT, particularly IT help desk, should we be optimizing more for the end user result, which is like, are they satisfied? Are they happy? Or just end to end, we got the thing done fast. And so we started exploring that. And that's when we started, as we talked to more and more IT leaders, we began to realize more and more IT leaders were actually concerned about both. Like, I need to be efficient, but I can't deliver a bad service. Like, that's the death blow. So like, I need to actually do both these at the same time. And that, how do you scale up a really good feeling service, is a fascinating problem. Like, that was the thing that's so exciting. Disney World writes books about how they scale up that Disney experience. Four Seasons has written books about how they scale up the Four Seasons experience. And so it was that class of a thing that got so interested in how do we do that in IT. And so that's a little bit about the moment that we were like, haha, we think we can do this.
And then what kind of features or capabilities in Fixify showcase this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we discovered pretty early on that were sort of key to dealing with this. So the first one was we needed to be able to understand what was going on in the customer's environment very rapidly, right? We're coming into an existing environment. They already have a ticketing system. They already have a whole bunch of stuff. They've probably been dealing with tickets for a while, and they're at this sort of like, I'm drowning point. So we're going to show up, and the first feature that we built was an ability to connect up to their existing ticketing system, pull out a whole bunch of historical tickets, and basically analyze them and say, like, okay, what kind of issues are you seeing? So like, sort of like, you can think about automated root cause analysis, categorization, that kind of thing. So I can come back and I can tell you, these are the issues you have a lot of, right? So if we were to focus on fixing some stuff, these are the places we would focus, right? The second thing that we do is we actually do sentiment analysis. We baked it right into that categorization analysis. So we're going to look at all the sort of language in the tickets, and we're going to try to figure out what was the emotional state of the person who actually filed the ticket. So we'll get rid of all the machine generated tickets. We'll filter all those out, and we'll look and say, like, for lack of a better way to put it, like, how pissed off are the people when they filed these tickets? And the reason is because it turns out that there's certain amounts of, for lack of a better way to put it, certain concentrations of emotional energy around certain classes of things that far outweigh what you would think they were, right? So like, for instance, certain classes of connectivity issues really irritate people. Like, I can't get to my email. It means I can't do my job. I am going to straight up murder somebody, right? And so if we can see that, we can then focus our energy. So that was the first thing. And we stumbled on that because it was just about trying to figure out where would we focus on taking work on, and doing this work really well for the customer. So that's the first thing. The second thing is adapting to the individual needs of each customer. And so the platform involves a combination of sort of, you can think about like run books or sort of like natural language automation together with some AI that helps our analysts understand each customer's environment individually without burning them down with all sorts of things they have to remember. So like the bane of the existence of every human operations center is if you go in there, you'll see a big monitor. Everyone has a big monitor, and that they just have sticky notes all the way around them of like, okay, this is the CEO at this company. Don't make them angry. And this is how they do it here, that sort of stuff. Let's see if we can get rid of all that and have the platform handle it. So we built a lot of sort of process description and AI into the platform, so the platform can kind of guide our people to do it the way the end customer does it without, them freaking out. And then the last piece is integrations with all of the technologies that the end customers have. So I want to be able to be in Slack. So if your user comes and files a ticket or complains and says, hey, this isn't working, I want our people to be able to reach back out and go, hey, how you doing? We're Fixify. And they're there in Slack because that's where they're going to go back and forth. And like, people are really comfortable in there, or Teams or whatever. I want to be integrated with your, Okta or whatever, your G Suite, O365, all the software you're using, so I can get the information, do the things I need without logging into 1,700 things, right? And that's where that scale piece really breaks down for a lot of companies because they don't build that layer. So those are the sort of three big things, that sort of like categorization, sentiment analysis, sort of automation and context, and then integration are sort of the three key things, I think.
Yeah, the sentiment part I find really interesting because that's one of the areas where I hear challenges in AI. And so how are you getting that information?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we've ended up doing. So we built a system to do it, and like it basically proceeds like at the highest level. And I'm the CEO, so I didn't write the code. So like I've got some engineers who are probably cringing even as I describe it. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're taking the ticket information from historical tickets. So we'll take usually about 90 days worth of tickets. And in that process, if you've filed multiple different tickets, we'll take all of those and we're going to use them. We're going to take all of the language in them, break it down into stuff, like n-grams, and sort of do linguistic analysis to try to figure out what your general tone is. Like, how do you approach problems? And we're going to classify you into one of four different personas, effectively. Like your communication style, you're a director, which means you show up and you're like, I have a problem, period. I'd like some help, period. I'd like that help now, period. You communicate that way, so that doesn't mean you're upset when you say it, right? But if in that sentence, then, now that we've classified you as a director, if one of the tickets says, I was working on this and lo and behold, it broke, you're being sarcastic at that point. Now you're irritated, right? So we can detect that deviance from what we would normally consider. It also catches stuff like emojis. Like, this is kind of interesting, but one of the things that's pretty true, and it's become more true in modern communication, is when people file bugs, even if they're going to a website or something like this, or they're sending an email to open the ticket, but definitely if they're in Slack, they'll oftentimes communicate via emoji. So you'll end up getting a frowny face or like an explosion emoji or whatever. So we're also triggering off of that kind of stuff, right? The last thing is, and this is kind of fun, but like a good example of this would be if somebody writes in a ticket something like, it's broken again, and again is in caps, right? That's a super passive aggressive way to tell you that like you've made my day worse, right? And so it's that class of stuff. So categorizing everybody into these buckets and then looking for those deviations allows us to sort of pick that up. The other thing that helps us do, though, so like this is where it gets really cool, is as we're having the conversations, as we're helping the person with their ticket, we're reanalyzing based on the communication with them how their emotional state is. And so we're trying to figure out, like, by the end of the ticket, have we made their day better fundamentally? Or are they still just as angry as they were before? Or even worse, did they enter happy and leave pissed off? Like, if that's true, then like we got real big problems. But that sentiment really helps. The other thing we do is that same analysis of like, this person's a director. We then hand that to the analyst, and as they're communicating, the platform is actually coaching them on, this is how this person talks, so you should talk that way too. The worst thing you can do, and so the canonical example I use, and I don't use this because it didn't happen, somebody told me this story, is like, executive comes in and goes, my thing's broken, I'm under a bit of deadline pressure, can I get it fixed? And an IT person responds with, LOL, that sucks, with an X and an emoji. It doesn't matter if you fix the problem immediately after that. You have seriously jeopardized your career at that company with that kind of a response. Our platform would have underlined it and been like, under no circumstances should you send this message, right? Do something better, right? And here's a better idea for how you should respond, kind of thing. So that's kind of how the sentiment analysis folds in there. And I think it's been, I think, one of the sort of the biggest ahas in terms of like places where there's good work to be done.
Yeah, but I'm fascinated by that. So your ideal customer sounds like it's the CTO. Am I correct on that?
It'll depend. So actually, what's interesting, this is another thing that was sort of an aha for us, right? So in a company, if you're a 200, 300, 400 person company, the person we're talking to likely has an IT title, but their title is probably VP of IT or Director of IT, something in that ballpark. You probably roll up to a CTO or somebody like that. Very rarely does a company that size have a CIO. Like that tends to be a much bigger company kind of a thing. VP or that director usually runs kind of a multifunction team. So they have some people who are doing help desk stuff. They have some people doing ERP. Maybe they have some security people, that kind of thing. So that's sort of like the ideal buyer persona, is those people, because then they're showing up saying, okay, I own all these problems, and there are a lot of them. I'd like to get a few of them off my plate.
And so what's happening in their world before they come?
Yeah, so we've got So we've sort of identified a couple of different patterns, right? And so I sort of say like three high level ones. So the first one is particularly with that customer who's 200, 300, 400, we're finding like this sort of take my tickets, like they're underwater. Usually they've got one or two people and they need four or five people, and they're unable to make forward progress on a lot of things just because of the interrupt driven nature of the other work, right? So in any IT department, you have a bunch of projects you want to get done. You want to move from this system to this system, or you want to stand up a new CRM or whatever. There's a big list of strategically important things that you want to do. And then you sit down on a Monday morning and there's like 15 tickets of things that broke over the weekend, and you start getting peppered. And the next thing you know, you're getting slacks and this sort of stuff. So your day is not your own and you lose control. So these are people who are largely being overcome by events. And that's sort of the first class of folk, right? The second group of people that we're finding are what we're calling sort of IT optimizers. So they're usually at a slightly bigger company. But the thing that they're dealing with now is like, hey, so I've got the fundamentals. I've got sort of a team of people doing some ticket handling stuff. I got a team of people doing ERP, this sort of stuff. I'm starting to do some automation, et cetera, et cetera. But I can't keep spending money at the same rate that my company is growing. Right. So there has to be some sort of change in the slope of this line. Right. A lot of those folks are actually looking around and they're like, I'd like a better automation framework, or I'd like AI, or, that those are the language that they're using to describe this problem. But fundamentally, it boils down to my current loading is for every 100 employees, I have one IT person. That will not continue forever. We're at the point now where something needs to fundamentally change. So that's the second case. There is a third case, which is usually a precursor to both of those states, which is I don't exactly know what's going on, but it seems rough, right? I got a lot of people who are clicking real fast. I'm not really sure what's going on, and I'm not sure if we're doing everything we should be. So in that case, this is one of the times where when people show up, they're like, can you just connect up to my ticketing system and tell me what's going on? And that's actually one of the things our platform does really well. So we'll connect up, do this initial diagnostic, like we can classify all the tickets, tell you where your heat is, and then also tell you how irritated your users are. And that kind of a report card is usually, those are stats and sort of stuff that most IT folks don't have. And so if you're sitting there like you've got like sort of three people sitting around you and you just hear them typing real fast all day, and you're like, I don't really know what's going on. It doesn't seem like everybody's real happy though. That helps out tremendously. So there's sort of three biggest buckets.
I'm hearing you talk about bandwidth or people resources a lot in the departments. Like what's going on there? Why are these departments consistently understaffed, and is it just not communicated to, say, CEOs, where there's a misalignment and misunderstanding of how important, having a fully staffed department is?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I have I'll give you the tactical answer, and then I have a philosophical answer for you, right? So we'll go both levels, right? At the tactical level, I think fundamentally, most of the time IT is viewed as a cost center, right? So you end up in a situation where your IT team's job is to, for X dollars, deliver on no irritated users and a general business result, right? And so like that is fundamentally the business that they're in. There are times when you end up in a business, and I've interacted, and you can see these sort of usually CIOs or something like this who show up and they're like, no, I lead a critical business function. My job is to enable the entire business. And if they can sort of get that vision into the rest of the company, oftentimes they have a lot fewer budget struggles. So like to your point about like, are they selling the vision correctly or not? But if you put yourself in the position of a 200 or 300 person company, like budget issues, schmudget issues, they're just like, look, we're growing as fast as we can. Like just set the thing up and go, right? There's not a lot of they've got more tactical problems. But at a higher level though, and the thing that is interesting to me, and this is sort of now we're just in Matt Peters' opinion land, which is always dangerous. And again, now I probably have marketing people that are like cringing, is there are studies out there that say that happy employees are more productive, right? So like there's a pretty well study that says happy sales teams are 30% more effective than unhappy sales teams. There is further a study that says that one of the number one things, the thing that makes everyone happy at work, this is a Forrester result, is feeling like they can make progress on things that matter at work, right? One of the number one things that takes away from that is the tools I have don't work. Right. So if I rolled up to a CRO and I said, I have a magic pill you can take that would get you a 30% performance improvement across your team, would you pay for it? They would say yes. Yes, I would. I absolutely would. But when I then say, okay, your team has to be happier, you probably need to get them more effective technology, more effective tools, that sort of stuff. They're like, whoa, hang on a second. There's some, I think, disconnect in people's minds about like what it looks like to build an environment where people can really thrive. And it's really been complicated over time with COVID sent everybody home. So you had this like working from home thing. It's all of these different SaaS applications. It's sort of like the complexity of the modern workplace is just really, I mean, it's really difficult to sort of conceptualize where do I put my bets to really deliver on a workforce that can absolutely kill it. Right. And so I think that that's actually a big chunk of the problem. Then the last thing is like a lot of times, like in those kinds of organizations, in the 200, 300, 400 person company, the IT team is kind of fighting for their lives. They're just like, they're behind already. Like there's always stuff to do. So to drop back a little bit, like, let's talk about this more strategically. Right.
Mhm.
Is a bit tough. So those are sort of my big ticket answers to that. I don't think, I don't think that I see in the short term big tectonic changes in that, right? And I think a lot of the IT professionals around that here would take a good pride in delivering high quality service at reasonably affordable prices. They're not interested in like, oh well, I'll spend all the money in the world. But I do think it's an interesting difference when you go into a company where they're like, no, like our IT is important because it makes our workers happier, which makes our workers more effective. You can see a difference. You can feel a difference, right? And that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I can also see the additional complications for that team when they're not the ones really choosing what software goes into a company.
Well, I'll and on that one. It's interesting when I see like very effective IT teams have a tendency to understand where they're bringing value in different decisions. So like the IT team will show up and say, hey, you're in the marketing department. You're going to pick the MarTech stack 100%. We've got some advice on ways that it could work with the rest of this stuff over here. And when it comes to buying it, we're really good at negotiating. So why don't you hand that to us, right? It's like that class of stuff. We'll step in at like key moments in this thing. One of the things that I worked at a company a couple companies ago, and the guy who ran IT was the best negotiator I have ever seen in my entire life. And so anytime in engineering we ever bought a thing, even if it was just pure engineering thing, we would call him and be like, hey, can you get in here? And he would get the price cut. So like if you know as an IT team where you're going to bring the value, and then you don't even necessarily always have to run the technology, but then you're like, oh, it does integrate with our single sign-on, it does integrate with our BI tooling, this kind of stuff. You can then deliver pretty well. So sorry to go on that tangent.
I think that's a really good point. I don't think I've ever worked for a company where the IT person or someone from the team came in to help with the, final negotiations of a product. So it's good advice. Okay. So let's talk customers. We've talked a lot about the product and internal teams. So can you share a story of a happy customer?
Sure. Actually, one of our early customers, as a matter of fact, was a company, sort of 200 employees, 2 people in their IT team. And when we showed up, one of the people had just joined the company, and their remit was like, hey, we have a bunch of projects that we want to revolutionize a couple of the ways that we're doing these sort of big structural things in our company. Like we have technologies we want to swap out and that kind of thing to really, like, the company's growing. Immediately hit the ground, pretty much overcome by events. By the time we showed up, they were like, look, basically I click as fast as I can all day, every day, and we haven't managed to make progress on any of these things over here. What can you do? So connected up the platform, very quickly identified like, oh, okay, like this is 100% what's burning it down, right? We can take on these things, right? There was also, as a side note, there was like one application that like, it wasn't even that the volume on this was too bad. It was just hateful work. It was just something that this person was like, I just hate doing this. Like, it's just, and I think everybody has that where they're like, the one thing at their job where they're like, if I never have to do this again, I would be happy. So like this was one of the other things that was going on. So we showed up and we're like, oh, okay, well, we'll take all this. And by the way, that thing right there, we can totally do that too. Don't worry about it. Like we got it. So very quickly, took some load off these folks. And we ended up getting a note from this person who's running this team that said, hey, for the first time since I've worked here, I was able to take a vacation and actually leave my laptop at home. Right. It was a huge, like, that's the kind of thing, honestly, like being a CEO, like mostly the job is just sort of like, arm wave. But every now and then you get a note like that and you're like, kind of made it all worth it, So that was a happy customer thing. And we did exactly what we had said that we were going to do is we're going to show up here and relatively quickly take a lot of this off your plate so you can go focus on the things that make it easier for you to wake up in the morning,
That's great. And what are you doing now to get other happy customers?
Sure. So we've got a couple of things that we're doing. It's the standard. So like for the customer size that we're doing a lot of sort of the standard outbound motion, sort of like SDR outreach, this sort of thing. We also have a bunch of LinkedIn outreach and things like this. One of the things that turns out to be very powerful for us is just telling people, hey, look, like we can for free connect up our platform and do this sort of report card for you. So if you're interested in seeing it, just come on over and we'll do that for you. And some of those turn into customers and some of those turn into just good conversations where we're like, by the way, like if you just turn this knob, and this knob, you'd be a lot better off. Why don't you try that and keep us posted, that kind of thing. And so that's been a pretty good source for us of customers. And then that turns into like a POC motion that works out pretty well. We've also been fortunate. And one of the things that I think is so interesting, it's a difference between the IT market and the security market, is that IT folks, like they're pretty like I want to say they're pretty open, but there's a lot of like they're looking around for stuff. And so we have actually, even though we're early days, a pretty good inbound of people who are like, I was just looking around. It's a Tuesday and I was just thinking about like, is there anything better we could do about our help desk? And so they're like out Googling and they find us and then we end up kicking off a conversation. And so one of the things I think is so interesting about that is like, if you think about the sort of interest in improvement that it takes to do something like that, on the behalf of an IT person, I think it's been an interesting eye opener in like how problem and solution oriented the IT buyer really is, in a way that I think a lot of security buyers are much more about defending things. And so they're much more in a protective crouch, which is like not wrong. It's very much how you have to be in that industry, but it's a little less like it's a Tuesday and I'm thinking about improving a thing, that sort of stuff. Right?
So what are the key differentiators of your platform?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things and I'd call out sort of what are we competing against, right? So in the average customer, we're potentially competing at the smaller end with a managed service provider, right? So there's a couple of things on our side. We're showing up with a technology platform that allows us to customize to the customer's environment, which is something that most MSPs don't, as we mentioned, don't flex particularly in that direction. Really focusing a tremendous amount on delivering that really, really high quality, tailored end user experience via a combination of technology and people. On the other side of that, oftentimes we run into automation platforms. So like it's MoveWorks or it's, Rippling or something like this. In those cases, those are pure technology solutions and they do well for what they do. And so this is the other thing, is that in no way am I throwing a rock at either MSPs or automation suites. Something like a MoveWorks, we have happy MoveWorks customers who are also Fixify customers. And the reason is because MoveWorks is really great at automating something that can be end-to-end automated. Right. If you can make a robot do the whole thing, then MoveWorks is going to be pretty good at it. The issue is there's so many things in IT that robots can't do the entirety of. And this is the sort of the big differentiator, I think, is our offering is a combination of people and technology. So if I have a thing in your environment where I can automate 10% of it, right, but the rest of it doesn't have APIs or has an old school crufty interface or whatever, we can still do that, right? Because I have people. At the same time, if I can automate, 90% of it, but I need a human decision in one point, our platform's great at doing that too, right? So like we can cover the whole spectrum. And then I think the last piece is this focus on really optimizing that end user experience through this sort of combination of sentiment analysis and tailoring to the work patterns and things like this, so that we can deliver a really, really high quality result that's measurable and observable by our customers. Like we set SLAs in our contracts around sentiment, and we actually have the ability, everything we do, the customer can see. And we have QC built in. So if a customer comes to me and goes, look, what's really important to me is that every single one of my end users is greeted warmly when they start, when they come in. When the first thing out of your mouth from a ticket better be, I'm absolutely here to help. I'm super jazzed that you're trusting us with your problem or whatever. You can just tell the platform that, and then we do it, right? And so in that context, it can be tailored, and what you think of as good can be enforced in a way that I think no other, offering like this has. So I think that's the other thing I'm really jazzed about.
So we haven't actually talked about this yet either. And you mentioned end user. So what does that experience look like? And how is your approach unique? I know for myself, what I'm seeing now, it's either, you get the bot or you get the AI bot and it tries to solve it for you. And there's all these different levels of support until maybe I just want to speak to a person. How do I get to that person? So what's your experience like?
Yeah, everybody's got that experience where like the first thing out of their mouth is agent, right? They just want to talk to a person as fast as humanly possible. So what we did at Fixify is we architected the product around that cut through, right? So the idea here is we have a platform, and you can imagine sort of like a shell. Inside that is our team, right? And it connects up to your ticketing system. So oftentimes in an internal support environment like this, the IT team will have hooked up the ticketing system so that end users come to that to sort of file an issue. So assume for a moment that's the model. We interact with the ticketing system such that like your end user doesn't have to do anything different. But then we're also integrated with Slack. We're integrated with Teams. So once we get that first message, we can pivot back around and say, "Hey, how you doing?" And you're going to get a real person. Like it's not a bot. It's actually a real person saying, "Hey, I'm here. I'm Jim. I'm from Fixify. I'm going to help you with this thing." Now, Jim is actually getting helped by a bunch of bots. And this is the thing is like the thing that I think a lot of people missed is for things like password resets, nobody minds communicating with a robot, right? Because it's relatively transactional, it's relatively quick. But if you're dealing with like my laptop is slow, the last thing you want is to go back and forth with a bot asking you a lot of dumb questions like, did you turn it off and on again, right? So what we've done is we've said, look, we'll make that the job of our person. And the bot is very, very smart and very, very technical. And so they'll talk to you, and their job is to make sure you're getting what you need, right? And then they're talking to the bot to be like, okay, this is the data we've got. And the bot goes, okay, well, why don't we try this? Do you want me to try that? And our person is like, yeah, why don't you try that? So what you get is you get a really good experience at the front end of this thing. Meanwhile, out the back end, our person is getting a tremendous amount of support. There is no moment where you get handed to a tier two. Right. It's not like our guy, Jim, is going to be like, I'm sorry, Sarah, I can't do that for you. Let me get another person. What's going to happen is they're going to go, okay, hang on. And they're going to go with the other person, and they're going to show up back here inside the platform. So we've optimized for that sort of front of house, back of house kind of a thing. I think that there is room for bots, but I think like you just have to understand like who's willing to deal with them and like how technical do they have to be and this sort of stuff and what instances they're actually appropriate. Another good example of this is like, and actually people have made good strides on it. If you look at United Airlines, they have a bot that will help you. If your flight gets delayed or something like this, it'll pop up a thing that says, do you want to rebook? Right. And so you press yes, and it gives you some options. And you go through the rebooking thing and that sort of stuff. What they don't do is they don't pop up like a text chain where now you're talking to a robot, because you don't want that many options. At that point, you want like, yes, rebook, please. Give me the 3 flights. I'll pick that one, right? Those kinds of things are times when interacting with a bot or interacting with automation is really, really useful. And you just have to have them well defined. And that's why we've gone with, we're going to use people at the front and then automation in the back.
Had that experience with United Airlines. Yeah, it was great.
The other place that this is true is actually, and this is part of the Ritz-Carlton, they actually have a thing, which is that you are empowered. Every single employee, from the person who washes the windows to the person behind the desk, is empowered to take care of a customer's need up to, I think it's like $2,000. If you need to do anything to help a customer with the thing that they need and it's less than $2,000, they trust you to make a good decision. And what that means is the experience you have is like 100 times better. This is one of the things that we do at Fixify is we're like, look, we don't want to have a tier 1 and a tier 2 and a tier 3. We think all people are equally capable of making good decisions. What we need to do is optimize that they have the time to make those decisions. So get rid of all the other cruft. And that, I think, is a better way to structure those, right? That's Matt P. Okay, now I'm stepping off my soapbox. I apologize.
From the end user experience, I think that makes all the difference. Empowering people because it gets taken care of right away.
When you get on the phone with them, is you're like, I'm dealing with a person who's going to get this done. Or, oh my God, I'm going to be in this phone maze for 4 hours. This is just soul sucking. You know what I mean?
It's
like you just can't.
Frustrating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk for challenges. So if you had a magic wand to kind of fix one thing right now that's happening in the business that you could solve instantly, what would that be?
So that's a toughie. Actually, I've been thinking about this because we're sort of a systems business, right? And so like one of the things is like the go-to-market is connected very much to the POCs, which is connected very much to operations, which is connected very much to the product. So sand in any of those gears ends up showing up as binding in other places, right? So like I'm a little bit less magic wand, like one place, right? I think though, if I were to say the one thing that I would love if we did better or that was fixed, I would say it's that inter-team communication, right? Because particularly for companies building a new thing, you're not really just building a product. You're building a product at the same time you're building a team, at the same time you're building a company. And so your ability to learn quickly is success or failure, right? So like you're basically building, we describe it internally, we call it a learning engine. Like that's what we're building, right? So if someone mentions something on a customer call, I want the engineers to hear about it 3 minutes later. You know what I mean? If somebody mentions something, in an interaction between one of our technicians and the end user, and things go a little wonky, I want that to be in front of management like that, so that we can learn as fast as we can about all the different things that are going on. If you imagine for a second that in any organization, your sales team are having hundreds of conversations a month. Every one of those conversations is an opportunity to learn something about the market that you're in and something about the customers that you're talking to, what's working, what's not, what resonates, what problems they're having, that sort of thing. I think there's a huge struggle that people have with operationalizing that class of intelligence. Similarly, in operations, every single day you wake up and you do this stuff and you have this high velocity engine of dealing with customer issues and tickets and things like this. Those are all opportunities to learn, what needs different, what needs to be improved, that sort of thing, and everything in between. And like, I think we're doing okay. Like I would give us sort of like a B plus. Like we're better than a lot of companies, I think. But like, is it absolutely where I would want it to be? No. That would be the one thing I would probably improve, is sort of like, end to end, does everybody kind of have their head on a swivel, and are they understanding like the different pieces of it and this kind of thing as much as they possibly can? That would be my one thing.
So kind of like an internal feedback cycle to disseminate information across teams. Is that
Yeah,
right?
and the thing there is, it's some of that, and then there's also sort of just operational intelligence of like what's going on and that kind of thing that is like tough to put both of those things together, right? And you're all like every business has these moments where you can point at like, if they only knew that this team over here was fixing that and the fix was showing up tomorrow, the conversation they just had would be totally different, right? But like they didn't know because the company's got 45 people in it, or 150 people, or 300 people, and you can't, once you have more than 3 people, they can't all be talking all the time, right? So that's kind of the dynamic, right?
So I think you mentioned something, learning engine, that you're developing. What you're really developing is a learning engine. So
100%.
can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a couple of pieces to this. So the first one is, we were very intentional when we first started the company to, every time we had a certain number of customer conversations, we would compile everything that we learned, and then we would review it as a complete team. And we'd just be like, this is what we've heard for, and like early days, it was like, we've had 10 customer conversations. This is what they were. And then we were like, and now we've had 50. This is what we've heard, this sort of stuff. Well, now what we do is like our entire go-to-market team gets together once a quarter, right? For a day. And we go through, all of the observations, what's working, what's not working, what are we hearing, customer profiles, all of this sort of stuff. So we're constantly sort of tuning what we're doing, where we're focusing, and that sort of stuff based on that external stimuli. We've tried very much to build into that the idea that our decisions are data guided, right? They're not necessarily data driven. One of the things is, a lot of times in this kind of a world, it's not that it's like you've got stars and you're drawing a constellation. You're not going to have the whole picture, but you've got enough data. So it's like, get the team together so I can hear from the SDRs, hey, what's going on the phones? Oh, you're hearing this. Oh, you're getting that question a lot. Okay, fair enough. Hey, product team, did you hear that, right? What's working in the, second demo? Okay, well, this, like, hey, why do we think that's working? Is there a way that we can preload that? Is there a way that we can screen for that kind of stuff? And this is one of those places where then you're bringing all of your data to bear. The same thing happens in our product team, right? So our product team gets together with the ops team and the customer success team. Like they actually get together weekly, right? But there's also sort of a slightly longer cadence of them reviewing all of the things that are going on, and like what's working, what's not, where are pain points, that kind of thing. Should we reevaluate? Should we do something different? That kind of stuff. And so we're constantly trying to improve. And one, having data, making sure that people understand that we look at a lot of data and how to do that and that sort of thing, having the data in the right places. We have a couple of very, very talented sort of data engineer type folk, but also then having environments where people can show up, and like, I was in a meeting today where we were talking about sort of one flow through in the company, and I was in there, but we had folks from customer success, we had folks from the product team, we had folks from engineering, we had folks from our research and development team, and everybody can show up and be like, I saw the same data, right? I came to a different conclusion. This is what I think, and then you go back and forth. But that's sort of how you kind of construct this culture of sort of learning engine kind of a thing.
Got it. And I can see how that can make like short-term changes, like 3 to 6 months for go-to-market or product development. How does that impact your decision for the vision of the product or vision of the company?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think The thing that we end up with is that the company has to go through certain sort of milestones where you like work back from certain things that we want to happen and want to be true. And so what you end up with is you sort of end up with like different levels of zoom out on the goals, right? So the way that we do that at Fixify, we have an artifact, and like I stole this from my previous company who stole it from somebody else, but we have this thing we call a strategy on a page, right? Our entire corporate strategy should fit on one page, one slide, and it should be understandable by everyone, right? And relatively verifiable. I don't always say measurable, right? So this is the thing, is like I'm not a John Doerr like OKR guy in the traditional sense, right? So ours, we have a target for mid-year, like this is how many customers we want that are happy with the thing that we do, that love what we do for them, right? That's like the overarching goal, right? But then underneath that, we have sort of three pillars. And then like the first pillar is like, I mean, I'm not that smart, so we don't have good titles. It's basically get the customers, right? It's like, what are we doing in the go-to-market team and the go-to-market engine to try to address this overall goal of where we want to be in terms of market share and things like this? And so we're making a couple of investments in, hey, I'm just making some stuff up. We're like hiring a couple of SDRs and getting them ramped up. And we're building out our process for POCs or whatever it is. It's like these kinds of things. And that team has said, given what you want over here, these are the things that we're going to work on. And every one of those I can look at any point and go, how are we doing relative to this? The middle one is keep the customers, right? Again, I'm not that smart. So like get the customers, keep the customers, right? And on keep the customers, this is our customer success and our product teams and our operations team sitting down and saying, what does it take to deliver delight to these customers, right? Like what are the things that we're going to work on that will make sure that we deliver that? And then the last one is, for lack of a better way to put it, and again, I'm not that bright, is build a company that doesn't suck, right? And so in that, just like I'm trying to deliver as a product in a company, happiness to end users in other people's companies, I need my employees to feel good about coming to work, right? I need people to be like, yeah, we're in it. We like working here. We think the problems are interesting. Our brains are engaged. We feel jazzed to be in the show. And quite frankly, I don't want to build a place that's like, could I build a really profitable company that was a sweatshop that just ground people in powder? Yes, I could. Who really wants to do that? Like, I don't want to build that world, right? So we have a bunch of stuff there that's around what is it like to work here? What are our benefits look like? What does our promotion paths look like? That sort of stuff. And so that's how we think about that longer term arc. And inside each one of those pillars, there's kind of a learning engine, right? With a little bit of crosstalk. So that's how we kind of think about it.
Yeah, I really like that. It's, very well organized and thoughtful. I can't tell you how many companies I've gone into that just doesn't have that laid out.
I had a real benefit. It was the last company I was at. I was employee number one. So I got to watch and I got to participate. Like there was nothing when I started, right? And we built the whole thing together. But the founding team of that company was incredibly intentional about thinking about that class of stuff in a way that made it an amazing place to learn about how to do this, right? So I can't say enough good things about like the mentorship and sort of the like if you've worked in a place where you've seen it done well, right? It really is. It is a strategic advantage. And this is the thing that blows me away is like there are so many companies out there that are like, we're going to be successful because we're going to be hard charging or whatever. And yes, absolutely, everyone should work hard. But this idea that like if you are intentional and you think about things and you spend a little time to go slow to go fast, and you make some investments in where it matters, it really does pay off. That at least that's been my experience.
Great. And so if somebody wanted to learn about Fixify, where's the best place for them to go to get information?
Yeah, so I would say number one place, our website. It's lovely. Fixify.com is where you can find us, and there you can find all about our product and our team and things like this. We're also relatively active on LinkedIn. One of the things that we were really proud of is we tend to publish a bio of a team member sort of every couple of weeks. We call ourselves internally, we call employees of Fixify Fixins. So you can meet a new Fixin. But yeah, our website is a great place to come learn about us.
Great. Well, Matt, thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, great show.